Just about a week ago, it was completely unclear, strangely enough, whether there would be any kind of real resonance or whether there would be any big noticeable surge in public influence and genuine public interest in the fact that the Yabloko party is actively participating in these upcoming elections. Many were saying that, well, why bother stressing over this Yabloko? They'll get 2% and it won't change anything at all, this participation, this support for the Yabloko party. And it turned out that's not the case. It turned out that people are quite ready to even take to the streets, ready to approach, to come to the courts, ready to, flood all their social media with support for this very Yabloko. It turned out that this exists. And this, by the way, in some way or another, feeds my theory that a protest will undoubtedly happen in Russia, and no one will ever be able to predict what it will be triggered by. That is, if someone thinks that, it's because of the war or because of gas prices, then that bet is accepted. But it could very well be that some deputy somewhere in Norilsk wasn't allowed to run in an election and was thrown in the slammer for 15 days. And that could very well, lead to some kind of domino effect. I mean, again, I keep repeating the same things, that in 2019, no one imagined that people in Moscow would take to the streets and fight with the cops over some dull Moscow City Duma elections. Yet it happened. Yet people came out, fought, and so on. In 2021, because of Alexei Navalny, there were record-breaking powerful protests all across the country. And when someone predicted that in 2022 or 2023 there would be protests because of this or that, nothing happened. In 2024, people came out because of Boris Nadezhdin, and in 2026 because of the Yabloko party, which everyone had forgotten or disliked. So yes, the Kremlin, not that I think people from the Kremlin are watching any of my speeches, but in the Kremlin, apparently, people in the presidential administration also suspect that it is completely impossible to predict what will cause a protest. And when they see that it's starting to flare up, they go to any lengths. Look, they're showing us Nikolai Rybakov, who is shaking hands like some kind of super mega politician, Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama rolled into one. There. And these are the kinds of lines forming for him. And in the Kremlin, yes, they had absolutely no idea that there would be such support. And since it did happen, even if just at the Moscow level, and it's only going to grow. Moving on to participation in the elections, of course, the Kremlin got very scared, and the Kremlin removed this very Yabloko party. And they will likely be just as nervous now, making some gestures related to mobilization. That is, again, the theory that I keep going around repeating on Freedom about 10 times when people ask me, will there be an announcement of mobilization? I say, yes, but it won't be like it was in, say, 2023, when Putin appears on screens and says, well, sorry, we have to carry out mobilization. It will be quiet, unnoticeable, because they are terrified that if they loudly announce a real official mobilization, there might be some protests. There might be, there might not be. But the Kremlin understands that if a protest does happen, it will be much larger than one can imagine. So yes, they are a bit afraid. It's not like they're thinking, oh my God, Yabloko. We are so afraid of Yabloko. Rybakov will tear Putin apart there. No, they understand perfectly well that it is a deeply systemic party, but they understand that a Russian revolt is completely uncontrolled and completely unpredictable, and they cannot grasp its limits either. So yes, that is what they are afraid of.
Well, that revolt kind of passed quietly, if you can say that, after the policeman's words that don't take offense, but whoever remains will take to the military enlistment office. They got scared and, yes, moved more into social media. But
partly, yes. But you see, they only let the first domino fall there. If they had given a bit more, if they had, brought everything to the elections, if they had let the poor Yabloko party participate a little more in all of this, to conduct some, God forgive me, campaigning that we are not a party for peace, but this Yabloko party, if you look under the hood, it's such a we are against the war party. They don't even say,
yes, against the war.
We're returning Crimea. So yes, this was just the beginning. The Yabloko party took some first steps on the path to some kind of recognition, and they got scooped up right then and there. A little bit more, I still think, unironically, that they could have fanned some larger fires. And I'm saying this, a huge hater of the Yabloko party, just a hater, a person who remembers all of Yavlinsky's statements when Alexei Navalny was in prison, and a person who remembers perfectly well how the Yabloko party said there, let's end the war. They were told, how? And everyone will disperse along the line of contact and let them just drop their weapons. And Yavlinsky would come and say, let the war be ended. I call on Ukraine to end the war. They told him, are you sure you haven't mixed anything up? Yavlinsky said, no, I am calling on Ukrainian soldiers to lay down their arms, and then Russian soldiers will lay down their arms, and this whole thing will end. That is, I am a super hater of the Yabloko party, but nevertheless, I wished it huge success and believed that, yes, it should be supported. And the fact that people went out into the streets and stood by the Supreme Court building, I know perfectly well. I read a lot of publications about how the cops scan everyone who goes out onto those very streets, those who go to the graves of deceased politicians and scientists. They even scan these people, the cops. And those who stood near the Supreme Court, of course, they recorded everyone, checked everyone there. It was a huge risk to just go out to the Supreme Court like that. And I respect these people very much. They are great. Well, it ended the way it ended. The Kremlin will not survive one of the next riots. If anyone wants to, let them put this in the headline. But that is my theory that strengthens faith in tomorrow.
Dmitry, how important are these elections? Elections without elections, yes, we all understand that. It doesn't look very good, but even the parties that the Central Election Commission registered didn't bother. At first, it was 11 parties in the State Duma elections. I'm just looking at the logos without even delving into the essence of the election program. And it all looks as if, like stitching together some endless Soviet Union. The CPRF with the Communists of Russia, Rodina, a party that is also a star of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Well, everything just looks like that somehow. And after that, some other things start like on Russian public pages. If you wander around, there's a new Red Square shopping mall, this and that. Are you serious, people? What are you building? It's just, some kind of flashbacks from the Soviet Union. What is it now? What kind of policy is the Russian Federation building? What is their concept or something? An empire or the Soviet Union? What are you striving for?
In terms of the party, by the way, it turned out interestingly there. Really, well, they can't keep the communists from the elections. But one of the most scary crash test warning lights for Putin is the Communist Party, because one of probably Putin's first challenges on his path to power was to defeat the communists there. That is the most influential party, the up-and-coming one that existed, which did not support Putin, was the CPRF. And so when he created the party, when the Unity Party was created around him from the Kremlin with Berezovsky's money, the task in those first pro-Putin parliamentary elections was to, overtake the communists, and they managed to catch up with the communists somehow through some kind of cheating. And then later he kept swatting them down more and more, shutting them out, making deals with Zhuganov, intimidating Zhuganov. And so this kind of challenge for Putin, it always exists. Not letting the communists into the elections is somehow too much. But at the same time, if you really let them into the elections, they might, do something to united Russia. And that's why there is the CPRF, and there are the Communists of Russia, a party whose only goal is to take away a few votes from the communists, even just a little bit, even a tiny bit. And the Rodina Party, which has a red star there, that's also so that some grandmother who doesn't know how to find the communists, when she sees the red star, she'll think, my dear ones, and would put a check mark for them. And that's the task. As for ideology, when I'm on air with political analysts myself, I asked the political analyst, did you want to say something, no?
No, I'm also the Pensioners Party, somewhere around there.
Yes, the Pensioners Party. Well, yes, there are about 4 or 5 spoilers there that, yes, are supposed to distract the pensioners from the real CPRF. And they tell Zyga, don't touch these ones, don't you dare. He never says anything like, we are the only real communists. The communists of Russia are some kind of fakes. He's not allowed to, they tell him from the Kremlin. If you say that, you're dead. So in the end, he's forced to tolerate all these spoilers. Yeah. And as for what the ideology is, when I talk to political analysts, they react differently. But I've realized for myself that they are developing this theory themselves. And for Putin, it's such an important thing there. We absolutely need to create some kind of ideology there. He quotes certain points from Ilyin at some point from some Soviet figures and tries to develop it. But sometimes the smaller the task, the more they labor over it. So he's there working on it with some of his Kremlin political analysts. And as a result, they, of course, perfectly understand point number 0, point number 1. We must unite around Putin. We must support Putin there. But they have no idea what comes next. And in this regard, it's funny to trace the vacillations of the Russian authorities over the last decade. 10, maybe 15 years ago, it seemed like Russia was turning into an Orthodox Iran. Constant patriarch Kirill, constant Father of Vsevolod chaplain, constantly some priests or other. And it seemed, Russia was sliding into orthodoxy. But at some point they looked and thought, nah, that doesn't look good, let's head in the other direction. And they started supporting something there, raising some Soviet symbols. They played around with that. And there was a period, around 2015 to 2016 with quasi-Soviet symbols. They played with them and thought, no, it's skewed too much towards the red. Let's go in another direction. Right now, their cult is war. And perhaps the ideology for Putin is that we are in a state of eternal war from, say, 1941 to, 2026. Just like we started fighting the fascists in 1941. And then with a small break from 1945 to, 2014, we've just been fighting and fighting. There were real fascists back then. Now there are some other fascists. So for Putin, the main ideology is an unceasing war. just like Igor Talkov predicted in his song. But the tyrant has not been committed to the earth, and the war has not ended. For Talkov, this was a song about something that God forbid we ever let happen. For Putin, this is something that must be constantly happening. He lives in this state of war, and that is why he is dragging out this war and will drag it out indefinitely, because he has no other ideology.
Yes, actually, Putin intends to continue the war at least until 2028. This was reported by the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalenko. He also noted that all parties in the so-called elections in the Russian Federation are for continuing the war, and the only active, yes, anti-war one, if you can call it that, Yabloko, was removed from the elections. At the same time, Putin and his entourage are profiting from the war. Let's listen and continue.
It is important to understand that there are economists in Russia who have access to Putin and are against pulling able-bodied men out of the economy and killing them in the war. However, the military, intelligence, some of the oligarchs profiting from the war, Kirienko and Putin himself, unfortunately, want to continue fighting. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the NSDC of Ukraine, on Telegram.
And what about Medinsky, right? Remember, he also said in the 100 Years' War, they were ready to fight forever. Actually, that is what the Russian Federation is heading towards, it seems. All right, and who then is making so much money from it that they are ready to accumulate these resources, well, to keep everyone else who is against it in line, so to speak? Are there resources, capabilities, and is it really targeted with the budget as well? The budget deficit has increased by another few trillions, so it's already 6.5 for sure as of today. The Moscow Times provides these figures. Can they, Dmitry?
Making money? Yes, absolutely. And one could list various ways of making money. Undoubtedly, the military sector is booming from how they are making money on all of this, receiving it and skimming it off. And it's quite possible to flesh out this scheme with the Ministry of Defense, where, well, some money is allocated to compensate for losses, yes, to pay the relatives. But at the same time, you can keep that money circulating indefinitely until a relative brings in their 100,000 certificate proving that someone died in this very war, this special military operation participant. Of course, you can keep the money circulating and not pay it out, or you can choose not to pay it out at all, or do something to that relative. These are huge millions. These are huge billions. But for themselves and the fact that one could list certain oligarchs who are making money from selling aluminum from financing this new weaponry, but I would separately single out ghouls of the kind like Sergei Kirienko and Marat Kusnulin, people who have been assigned to make money in the occupied territories, and also some Chechen pro-Kadyrov types. This is such a, well, three-headed, although in reality it's more multi-headed hydra. They are powerfully and massively making money on construction, fake construction in the Mariupol area and in the occupied, regions of Donbass. Indeed, you can look at a great many beautiful, cool investigations. The publication Projekt also did a piece on how they make money in this very Mariupol. Mariupol alone is worth noting. And they pretend that, look, we had a construction site in this area, a construction site in that area. Look, we completed there a building that cost such and such an amount. In reality, the amount is much smaller. It's like it's made of bricks, but in reality, well, I'm exaggerating a bit. It's like made of cardboard. We have a bunch of micro districts there. And then people watch these videos and say, yo, you've only built like 2 or maybe 1.5 micro districts in that very Mariupol, and where there used to be squares, you actually just have these vacant lots. On all of this, of course, they are undoubtedly making money. And well, damn, Kirienko will, of course, pour as much as he wants into Putin's ears, saying, let's continue this war itself further. Yes, undoubtedly, someone like Deripaska and Gref or someone like Nabiulina are groaning about what is happening there. And they couldn't care less about all of this. The oligarchs who can't travel, west of Kaliningrad, they also couldn't care less about all of this. But nevertheless, this sound of money is, of course, accompanying Kusnulin and that whole crowd. They are making money just fine, and that is terrifying. I mean, it would seem, right? If they were all losing out because of this very war, maybe they would have somehow convinced Putin or taken him out, but they have learned how to make money from all of this, and they are just thriving on how